Here's one of the coolest little developer Easter eggs that I found in The Walking Dead for you. In this scene that I know traumatizes quite a bit of you, so I'm very sorry for that. If you take the camera up to the can instead of the dog, you can see something that the developers had a little bit of fun with. On this can of beans, it says Family Style 1978, but the smaller text has some really funny dialogue. It says, "If you can read this label, you are dangerously too close to this label. Please step back or see a doctor. This label is not meant for reading this close. Also, I like beagles. They are nice dogs. They like to smell things." Okay. And it doesn't even end there. In later scenes in this season, if you go up to these cans of peaches, they also have some funny dialogue. First, the little blurb here says, "This is just a bunch of nonsense. Don't take any of this seriously. To whomever this may concern, this is just a bunch of garbage text to use on the label. If you actually eat these peaches, you would most likely die a horrible death." And then on the nutritional side of things, it replaces vitamins with "Can you read this?" There's also some unused content. So Sarah does have this book that she mentions that she's reading, but if you take the camera up to that book, you see the cover reads, "The Gurgles." It features a boy in a baseball uniform holding a sword with a castle off in the distance. And this footage that you've been looking at is a later scene that also seems to use a $100 bill as a bookmark, which is never seen at any point. But I happen to know that it is a bookmark because after a certain scene, the $100 bill is placed inside the book. Then the scene when you're supposed to grab the knife and try to attack William Carver, and it obviously doesn't go well. The knife has a little Easter egg of its own. If you take the camera up to the handle of the knife, you can see the Telltale Games logo, which is obviously the developers who made this game. Also, one of the later episodes, Clementine is taught how to pilfer off of fresh zombies. And very, very briefly and from far away, you can see the driver's license of the zombie that you pilfer. There's two interesting things to talk about. If you take the camera over to the Virginia driver's license, you can see the full names of both of the characters here, one of which being John Sandusky. And although it's completely covered up by the first driver's license, you can also see his wife, presumably, and her name is Tamara Sandusky. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that if you take the camera over to the zombie, you can see that his facial features match that of the driver's license. A little bit of an extra detail that you normally don't get to see. And next we have a detail that seems to be pretty much meant to be cut. It looks like it was meant to be some sort of magazine with a pencil, crosswords with a pencil. It's hard to say because the entire model is blacked out. Now, this model though is also never seen in the game itself. Even during the cutscenes where it'll move around to different angles of the truck, at no point is this object within shot of the camera, meaning that whoever was the cinematographer seemed to deliberately keep this out of shot. And whether this model was blacked out in post because of some offensive material, or just happened to be a model that wouldn't map correctly, or they just did not decide to put any detail into this object, and then for whatever reason they were like, well, why'd you do it like this? And they just kept it out of shot. We'll never know exactly what the reason is. I did try to reach out to the developers about this, but everyone that was on the environment team seemed to be unavailable to answer that question. And there's also all sorts of stuff written on the bathroom stalls at the very start of the season. So I wanted to read out all the things that were found, starting with T-Bone is the illest. But right underneath that, someone writes, "I'm sorry to hear that. I hope it gets better soon." There's another one that says, "Where's the weed at?" This episode's not doing any favors for YouTube's new AI. This one has a picture of a shark fin in the ocean, and it says, "The largest eggs in the world are laid by sharks." And then underneath that, someone wrote, "The largest woman in the world is laid by your dad." Here's another one that says, "You're already dead." This one says, "Poop freely, my brethren." This one's pretty cringe. It just says, "I just wrote on the wall, take that, society." And then there's also this in quotations. It says, "Banang," which is an ongoing joke at Telltale Games. Banang started off as a gag in Sam and Max Season 2 as a banana-flavored drink. And it was definitely one of the better gags in that game, where Sam would just keep saying, "Banang." Banang. Banang, 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 banang. You can also see a canister of Benang in the flashback sequence of Season 2 as well, in the RV. There was also this drawing of this guy, and there's not much to say about him except for the fact that he is, in fact, a guy. And then early on in the season, when Clementine washes up on the river, if you take the camera inside of the environment here, you can find an unused signpost. Now, the reason why this signpost wasn't used seems pretty clear to me. It's because it's not textured properly. So at certain angles, you can see the sign all the way up the spine of the sign, and also certain angles have the words backwards. It's just a poorly textured sign, and it's a good chance that the developers in a rush just shoved it into the environment so that the player could just never see it. It's not super important anyway. And then in the comic book shop where you meet up with Luke, you can see all the comics inside the comic book shop are real comic book covers from Image Comics. And of course, since The Walking Dead is associated with Robert Kirkman, who also writes Invincible, you will see a whole bunch of Invincible comic covers that were featured here before the meteoric rise of the TV show. And then I wanted to show you a character model that is in fact used, but they hide her face quite a bit. Why they don't choose to show her face at all, I'm not exactly sure, but this character is used all throughout this chapter as one of Carver's people. And you can see that she's uniquely modeled. She doesn't share a facial model with any of the characters that are in any of these chapters. They could have very easily shown her off, they just choose not to. She's always way off in the distance, or her face is just completely covered by doors or camera angles and stuff. Now let's talk about zombie hordes, because yes, there are large zombie hordes in The Walking Dead. That would be really weird if there weren't. And if you take the camera all the way up to one of these long distance wide shots of the zombie hordes, you can see that many of the zombies are in fact billboards. Billboarding, of course, in video games is just turning something into a flat texture to kind of deceive the player into thinking that it might be a 3D model off in the distance. It's supposed to blend in a 3D environment at the very least. And like I said, there's a lot used here. The technique will change a lot for Season 3, and of course, if people are still interested in Walking Dead content, I'll cover that soon. But for now, the graphics are still not that drastic from Season 1. The only thing that I thought was very, very different from Season 1 of The Walking Dead is reflections. Here in this season, they still don't do ray tracing though, instead doing something called render to texture or a portal camera. So when you take the camera off its axis, you can see where the camera is actually pointing versus where the reflection would be, and so the illusion's completely destroyed. Because if the reflection was genuine, you would be able to see the model reflecting off of that surface at any given angle. But like I said a second ago, you can see where the invisible camera is pointing instead. Also, what's interesting is that this effect is used on two different mirrors, but never both at the same time. So while the reflection is going off of this side view mirror, you can see the rear view mirror without its reflection, and you can see what would be behind that reflection, which is just a white void. And also, in the same breath, if the rear view mirror's reflection is being used, then you can see the side view mirror without its reflective surface, and you can see the texture that would be underneath, which is actually a genuine texture that just has no reflection. Here's something that's really interesting too. When you get introduced to the group for the first time in Season 2, if you take the camera underneath the porch, you can see two zombies being stored here. Now, it looks like one zombie, but if you look at things like the hands and the face, you can see the Z-axis fighting with one another between the two zombies. They just animate exactly the same, so it doesn't look like more than one zombie. Also, I want to take the camera up to this raccoon model because you don't usually get a great look at this raccoon. If you take the camera inside of this raccoon's head, you can see that he has fully modeled eyeballs, which due to this, it gives it a very similar sort of look as the dog in the earlier parts of the Season 2. Also, the scene where Clementine and Sarah are picking berries, if you take the camera inside the building here, you can see all the character models stored in one spot. Now, it's not like the zombies, though. They seem to be lined up, almost like they're being picked for dodgeball or something. And they're not the only things that you can find here, too. There seems to be a smoke particle effect, as well as some sort of wire that clearly gets used later on in the chapter as well. And in the same scene, Reggie gets his demise and gets pushed off the building. And I wanted to show you what that looks like because it doesn't actually show the impact of Reggie. I had to re-record this several times because I didn't know where the body would actually land. But I was right about one thing though. There isn't a full clean animation of him falling off and falling into this position. Instead, the falling body is closer to the ice machine, whereas the impacted body is closer to the shopping cart. Also, this might seem a bit dumb, but it is true. You never get to see inside this bucket, despite the fact that inside the bucket is exactly what the game says there would be, which is a bunch of nails and hardware for the people to use. In one of the last scenes of the season, when Kenny's fighting Jane, if you take the camera inside the bathroom, you can see that there is supposed to be modeled bathroom parts inside here. Now, the characters never go inside there, and despite the fact that I take the camera in there, I can't trick the game into unculling what should be inside this bathroom, but you can see shadows of what is supposed to be toilets, urinals, things you would normally find inside of a bathroom. There's something that a lot of fans of the games want to see really badly, like, for example, these large crowd scenes where you're walking through a whole bunch of zombies. What does that look like from far away? Well, as you can see, the developers carefully put zombies in certain places just so that they look crowded, but when you pull the camera away like this, you can see they only have a certain number of zombies to work with, so they don't do a true giant crowd of zombies. Instead, they use a generous amount of zombies, even still, and sort of crowd them into specific spots to pull off that illusion.
She's dead, man. Leave her alone!
And then at the start of episode 4, you're walking through the woods here, and in a rare instance, we have these walking woods environments, one of many that are in this game. And the way it likes to work, by the way, is that the characters usually walk in place, and it's the environment that moves instead. And now that I'm done explaining that to you, if you look over to the left here, you can see a hub area that gets used just after this scene. So they share a loaded map together, which is something I had not seen throughout most of my time poking around in this season. This is where the Civil War monument is, and you can still see characters loaded up and ready to go for when they're going to be used in the scene. Sadly, you don't see as many T-poses in this season as you did in the first season of The Walking Dead, though I did find one instance of it with this Russian here. Also, by the way, there are scenes like when you fall into the ice lake and you lose Luke. I wanted to show you what that looks like from another angle. Yes, they are in fact underneath the lake. They just darken up the environment and show God rays inside of there. And what's really fun is that when you lose Luke and you get out of the water, the lighting returns to the lake. And so when you get it back, you see the zombie that dragged Luke as well as Luke in a standing position, but at a really weird, funny angle. Here's a scene with Kenny doing clobbering time on Arvo from another angle. I made sure to include the original footage to show you how it looks, but you can see how the actors just sort of jump around constantly and how everything is a little more deliberate. Here's another example of manipulating your perception. If you look outside of this truck that the characters are being transported in, you can see that it's actually the characters bumping up and down and not the truck itself, because if you take the camera outside of the truck, it's stationary, not even moving on the road, and it's just standing there without any bumping or anything. It's completely still. And you can also see all the weapons from the enemy characters hanging out behind the truck as well. Here's one of the very first antagonist characters in the season, and you're not supposed to see what it looks like when she's walking towards the bathroom stall. And for good reason here, you can see that her eyes are completely bugged out because they're not animated yet. In fact, you can see the exact frame in which the animators start to animate her face, and it looks like there's a lot more purpose to her expression than there was before. You can also see what happens to the character off screen once she's dealt with. She slumps and then stands up. Needless to say, you're not supposed to see it.
Oh God, Homie, can you hear me? Homie.
And then there's this scene where Clementine notices a light on the other end of the bridge, and it's very, very far away. Take the camera all the way over there, can show you what that light actually is. And it appears to just be an egg-shaped light. There's a slight possibility that the feathering of the light is disguising what it might be as an object, which, if I was to guess if it was an object, it could be a Christmas light that's used in a later scene. But I would probably take the guess that it's just a ball of light. Also, much to my surprise, despite the fact that many bags do not get opened at all, there will be objects inside of them. Like, for example, this one here, that's not even owned by Clementine, does have Clementine's stuff in it, the stuff that you see in an earlier episode of the game. Like, for example, the torn picture of Lee and the drawing of Kenny and his family. There's also other cool things in here too, like a deck of cards with the Queen as the facing card. And like I said, that's not the only time you see that, although there is a time and place where a duffel bag might be opened and show you food inside. The bags that are used in this scene are never opened, and it has the same food stored inside of there. I'm just surprised that the food is always stored in there, because as a game developer, you tend to be more concerned about stuff like this clipping through the bag. And so in order to do that, they tend to not have objects just stored inside of them like this. It's really cool. Now, in this scene, despite the fact that there's an earlier episode when he first loses his eye, that you can actually see his eye underneath the bandage, once it gets to this part of the game where you're supposed to see how the eye looks, you can take the camera inside and see that the developers actually removed Kenny's eye. And the last two things I'll show you before telling you that you can watch the season 1 episode of Walking Dead at the end of this video and in the video description is, first, there is a biker zombie that is really hard to see. He is technically used in the game, but he's really far away. And if you take the camera over, you can see that there's an incredible amount of detail to this biker zombie. He's got a biker helmet and even has a face underneath that's fully modeled. The other really cool thing is that Carver's settlement is fully modeled at all times, despite the fact that you can't really just explore this area. It is fully detailed with Carver's office and everything all housed in one giant environment. Something you don't normally see throughout any point of the game. And like I said, if you want to watch the first season, if you missed it, it's in the video description, and it's also going to be at the end card here. Anyways, we're going to see how you folks still feel about the Walking Dead game, and if you're still interested, there might be a season 3 episode. Thanks for watching. Take care.